Simon Cowell's journey from the son of a stern father and emotionally distant mother to one of the most influential figures in entertainment is a story marked by rejection, failure, and resilience. Born on October 7, 1959 in London, Simon grew up in a wealthy family. Yet the home he inhabited lacked warmth and affection. His mother, Julie, was a ballet dancer and socialite, admired for her elegance, but emotionally unavailable to Simon. His father, Eric, was a stern figure, focused on achievement rather than affection. Simon craved validation, but no praise came from his parents. This absence of love shaped his ambition and need for recognition, setting him on a path where nothing was ever enough. The boy who grew up feeling invisible would spend his life fighting to be seen, often through ruthless determination. A childhood of rejection and neglect. Simon's childhood was defined by emotional neglect. His mother loved him but couldn't express it, and his father never offered the comforting words, "I'm proud of you." As a result, Simon's early years were marked by loneliness and a profound sense of inadequacy. At school, he didn't fit the mold either. He was known as the problem child, dismissed as difficult and rebellious by teachers who failed to understand his restlessness. Simon wasn't unintelligent. He was simply bored. The rigidity of the school system stifled him, and the expectations of his parents left him feeling like a failure. With only a handful of qualifications, Simon left school feeling aimless, with a bruised sense of self-worth. The rejection he experienced from both family and school would become the driving force behind his ambition to prove himself to the world. The struggles of starting over. By his late teens, Simon's life had become a cycle of rejection and disillusionment. Unable to find his footing in traditional jobs, he took odd positions that led nowhere. His father, seeing his son's struggles, pulled some strings to get Simon a job at EMI Music Publishing, where Simon worked in the mailroom. Despite his family's connections in the music industry, Simon was still invisible, reduced to delivering coffee and sorting fan mail for artists who didn't know his name. But Simon didn't accept this fate. He left the company, determined to find something better, only to return defeated when the world outside proved even more unkind. His sense of failure deepened, and he found himself back in the same place, humiliated, but determined not to give up. It was during this time of low visibility and deep despair that Simon would begin to shift his approach to life and work. A shift in focus, lessons from failure. Humiliated and broken, Simon Cowell began to use his rejection as fuel. He locked himself in the bathroom, crying in frustration and fear. But this fear didn't break him. It hardened him. From the ashes of his failure, Simon began to develop a single-minded focus on success. No longer content with merely surviving, Simon started studying the music industry, watching how artists were packaged, how songs were chosen, and how fame was manufactured. The mailroom at EMI became his classroom, and he absorbed every detail about the business. By the early 1980s, Simon had worked his way up to a junior A&R position. But he wasn't content. He wanted more. He wanted to be the one making the decisions, not just following orders. And so, in 1983, Simon made a bold move. He launched his own label, Fanfare Records. The rise of Fanfare Records. With Fanfare Records, Simon Cowell tasted success for the first time. He worked on the novelty pop hits of the 1980s, including So Macho by Sanita, which became a chart-topping hit. For the first time, Simon wasn't just another face in the corporate world. He was the boss, and people began to notice him. The success gave him the freedom to indulge in a lavish lifestyle, expensive dinners, flashy clothes, and the growing reputation of being a rising star in the music industry. This was everything Simon had dreamed of as a child. The boy who had been invisible was now visible. He had finally escaped his father's shadow and found a sense of validation. But the world of entertainment is volatile, and Simon's empire would soon come crashing down. The collapse of Fanfare Records. The 1980s came to an end, and so did Simon Cowell's first taste of success. The market shifted, and the novelty pop sound that had propelled Fanfare Records to success became stale. Acts that had once been at the top of the charts now found themselves irrelevant. Distribution deals fell apart, and Simon's label began to unravel. By 1989, Fanfare Records was dead, and Simon found himself facing the consequences of his ambition. He had lost everything: his reputation, his money, and his label. He was 30 years old and bankrupt. Friends who had once supported him vanished, and Simon was left alone to pick up the pieces of his shattered career. His childhood of neglect had led him to pursue fame at any cost, but now that he had tasted it, he was back to square one, facing the cruel reality of failure once again. The humiliation of returning home. The collapse of Fanfare Records hit Simon Cowell harder than he expected. Not only had he lost his financial stability, but he was also forced to return to his childhood home, to the same bedroom where he had once cried in frustration. This was the ultimate humiliation for Simon, who had spent years chasing approval and recognition. He was back in the place where he had always felt invisible and unloved. The feeling of inadequacy and failure was overwhelming, and Simon would later admit that those years in his childhood bedroom were some of the darkest of his life. He had reached the pinnacle of success and then lost it all, and he couldn't help but feel as though he was back where he started, unseen and unimportant, rebuilding from the ashes. But Simon Cowell wasn't done yet. Rejection had been his constant companion, but it had also taught him to fight back. In the midst of his despair, Simon began to rebuild. He took meetings he didn't want to take, pitched ideas to people who had written him off, and accepted small consulting gigs just to survive. The industry had written him off, but Simon was determined to make a comeback. He had learned a valuable lesson from his failure. It wasn't about seeking validation from critics or the elite. To succeed, you had to connect with the masses. This realization would shape Simon's career in the coming years and lead to the creation of his greatest successes. The reinvention of Simon Cowell. The early 1990s were not kind to Simon Cowell. At 30, he was broke, living in his parents' home, and trying to rebuild his career from the ground up. The music industry had no mercy for failures, and Simon was starting from scratch. But as he rebuilt, he became more focused, sharper, and more determined than ever. He knew that his future didn't lie in pleasing critics or industry insiders. It was about reaching the public. And so, he began to build his empire, starting with American Idol and later branching out into the X Factor and Got Talent. He found success by embracing the masses, creating shows that appealed to a wide audience, and tapping into the dreams of ordinary people. Simon Cowell's transformation, the power of perseverance. By the time Simon Cowell turned 65, his life had undergone a remarkable transformation. No longer the ruthless mogul of his earlier years, Simon had learned that success was not just about power, money, and fame. It was about understanding human nature, connecting with people, and embracing vulnerability. The near-fatal accidents in 2020 and 2022 forced Simon to slow down and reevaluate his life. His body, once a reflection of his ambition and drive, was now a reminder of the price he had paid for his success. But through it all, Simon had learned one crucial lesson: never give up. His resilience, forged in the fires of rejection and failure, had turned him into the most powerful man in television. And as he held his son Eric tighter, terrified of time running out, Simon knew that the journey wasn't over. It had only just begun.